afternoon and welcome to the Program of Projects webinar. I'm Danusha Chandy, the Senior Engineer in the WIFIA program, and I'm joined by Brian Jefferis, who is a WIFIA underwriter. Happy St. Paddy's Day to everyone out there, and I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that we are doing this webinar completely remotely, so it's the first time for us doing it this way. We think we've set it up so we should be able to move forward smoothly, but if there are any hiccups, I apologize in advance, just so you know. And so part of that means that we have a team that are running the slides, and Brian and I are going to be speaking remotely, so bear with us as we say next slide. So Caleb, you can go to the next slide. Great. So there is an opportunity for the audience to ask questions and receive answers during the webinar. We're more than happy to answer any clarifying questions on the information presented today, and some of your questions may be answered in a future webinar in more detail as well. Questions can be posted at any time by typing into the webinar dashboard. All participants are muted during the webinar and may only communicate by typing. If we do not get to your question or are unable to answer, we will follow up through email or through an FAQ document that's posted on our website. Next slide, please. The WIFIA program is hosting this webinar series to help prospective borrowers better understand our program, its benefits, and its application process. These webinars allow EPA to interact with prospective borrowers and the water industry and finance professionals from across the country. Ultimately, we hope that these webinars will pave the way for successful letters of interest in future funding rounds. Today's webinar will provide an introduction to the WIFIA program, and then I'll explain what a program of projects is, and Brian will present 2 sample projects. We will end with time for questions and answers. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's begin with an introduction to the program and our mission. So our mission is to accelerate investment in our nation's water and wastewater infrastructure by providing long-term, low-cost, supplemental credit assistance under customized terms to credit-worthy water and wastewater projects of national and regional significance. The terms in our mission statement were selected for, oh, that's okay. They were selected for a reason. Though it's short, it succinctly describes the purpose and goals of WIFIA. So our program's been around since 2014 in the Water Resources Reform and Development Act, or WRDA. It was modeled after a similar successful program at the Department of Transportation called WIFIA. Between 2014 and 2016, EPA took the necessary steps to establish a federal credit program at the agency, and we developed an administrative framework to make loans. In December 2016, Congress appropriated $25 million for our first credit subsidy for fiscal year 2017. This allowed EPA to open its first selection round from January to April of 2017 and select its first 12 projects for about $2 billion in loans. In fiscal year 2018, Congress appropriated $55 million, and we invited 39 projects to apply for about $5 billion in loans. Next slide, please. In 2019, Congress appropriated $60 million, and we were able to invite 38 projects to apply. And for fiscal year 2020, we've received $55 million in subsidy amounts, and we expect to publish the notice of funding availability in the summer. Next slide, please. Now I'll go into some of our eligibilities for participation. So we have a broad set of eligible borrowers and eligible projects. The following types of entities can borrow from WIFIA: local, state, tribal, and other federal government entities, partnerships, joint ventures, corporations, trusts, SRF programs. Really, any entity is eligible to borrow from WIFIA. The only ineligible entity is really an individual person or a homeowner or farmer. Next slide, please. WIFIA can provide financing to projects that are eligible for the Clean or Drinking Water SRF, enhanced efficiency projects of drinking water and wastewater facilities, brackish or seawater desalination, aquifer recharge, alternative water supply, and water recycling projects, drought prevention, reduction, or mitigation projects, and acquisition of property if it's integral to the project. A combination of projects secured by a common security pledge or submitted under one application by an SRF program is also eligible. The broad set of eligible project types allows WIFIA to reach down to almost all water and wastewater infrastructure projects out there. Next slide, please. Some important features of WIFIA to keep in mind when you're thinking about the program is that for most projects, the total eligible project cost must be at least $20 million for large communities and at least $5 million for small communities, which is defined as a population of 25,000 or less. WIFIA is a co-financer and can only fund 49% of eligible project costs. Repayment of loans can be up to 35 years, and repayment can be deferred up to 5 years after substantial completion of a project. The interest rate will be locked in at closing and be equal to or greater than the U.S. Treasury rate of a similar maturity. Projects must be creditworthy and meet federal and cross-cutter requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about compliance. As I mentioned, borrowers must comply with all federal laws and regulations that are relevant. And this is a small list of the most common, including NEPA, American Iron and Steel, and Davis-Bacon. American Iron and Steel, or AIS, is one of the big two of the non-environmental federal requirements for the program. If you've worked with SRF programs, it's essentially the same requirement. For AIS, the WIFIA program does have the responsibility to monitor compliance for this requirement through site visits and document reviews. In this way, we act similarly to state SRFs. The provision requires the use of primarily iron and steel products to be produced in the U.S. for federally funded projects. There's a list of products covered by AIS, including pipes and pipe fittings, hydrants, municipal castings, tanks, manhole coverings, structural steel, reinforced precast concrete, and a general category of construction materials. The second of the big two non-environmental federal requirements is Davis-Bacon. There are other federal labor laws and standards, but we'll focus on Davis-Bacon, which is specific to public buildings and public works projects. For Davis-Bacon, the program does have the responsibility to monitor compliance for this requirement through site visits and document reviews as well. Next slide, please. When it comes to compliance, it's important for everyone to be aware that intentionally splitting up a project into smaller contracts does not avoid federal requirements on a portion of a larger contract. Multiple projects are considered a single project if they are closely related in purpose, place, and time. I'll be getting back to this concept later on during the presentation. Therefore, if a portion of a project receives any WIFIA funding, then the entire project has to comply with all federal requirements. Next slide, please. And thank you. And now let's get into what a program of projects is and isn't. First, we'll start with what it isn't. Many of our WIFIA loans are single projects. such as the San Francisco Biosolids Project or the City of Omaha's Retention Treatment Basin. These projects have one purpose, which is to upgrade or build a new treatment facility. There are many other examples of single projects, which are on our website, but these are basically one location, one project, one purpose, generally one large construction contract. Next slide, please. Another typical loan that we provide is for a combination of projects. So one loan can provide assistance towards multiple projects, and all of these projects share a common purpose, have a similar construction timeframe, and share a common security pledge. Generally, these projects' locations and schedules are well known during the application phase. We have lots of examples of combinations of projects on our website, but a couple of them include the City of San Diego's Pure Water Project or Miami-Dade's well construction projects. Next slide, please. Okay, and now we're going to get into what a program of projects is. A program of projects is slightly different from a combination of projects. Generally, these projects include regular rehabilitation or repair of similar assets, such as sewer or water pipes, over a given period. Also, during the application phase of WIFIA, we may not know the exact locations or schedules for the work. So, for example, a utility may have a standard repair and inspection, repair, and rehab program for their sewer pipes, and their goal is to get to about 50 miles of pipe annually with inspections, and then repair and rehab a certain amount of the pipe that is deemed necessary for repair or rehab based on the inspection. WIFIA can provide funds to cover, 2 to 5 years of a program like this, but the way we go about doing our review is a little bit different, and some of the compliance concerns are a little bit different for projects or programs like this. So far, we've worked through, we have and are working through 3 programmatic type projects, including Toho Water, DeKalb County, and American Water in St. Louis. Brian will be talking about the first 2 projects in further detail later on during the webinar. This project the definition of a program of project, if it is confusing, please feel free to ask questions, and we'll try to clarify any confusion towards the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. And so again, the biggest difference between a combination of projects and a program of projects is that in a program of projects, the geographic area may be known. So we may be working within the confines of a city limit or a service area for a distribution system or collection system, but we don't really know exactly where the work is going to occur and where it's going to occur. We do limit the program of projects general construction duration to about a 5-year period. So you could fund up to 5 years of a program through WIFIA, but not more than that. But if you wanted to get funding for more than 5 years, you're always welcome to come in for another LOI round to fund a follow-up program. Next slide, please. So one of the things to keep in mind is that because we don't know the location or specific scope or extent of the work prior to closing, the project will continue to be defined after closing through monitoring reports. Now, all WIFIA projects require monitoring reports. Generally, it's quarterly reports that we require, but we accept monthly reports if you have those readily handy as well. So borrowers submit quarterly reports where they indicate which contracts have been executed and let us know how much work is expected through each contract. So prior to closing, you may tell us, we want to fund about 100 or 200 miles of repair and rehab in the city of, Wichita or something. And we don't know exactly where the work is going to occur, but as the work packages are created and executed, we will update the monitoring report with the locations and scope of the work. Next slide, please. And so one other thing to keep in mind with a program of projects is compliance. And I'm going to go a little bit back to what I said earlier, which is that you cannot split up a project to avoid compliance with any federal requirements. So you should be aware that compliance for especially AIS and Davis-Bacon may be a little complicated for programs or projects where the location and schedule isn't well defined at closing. It is the borrower's responsibility to ensure compliance, and EPA will perform audits to confirm compliance as well. If borrowers are planning on doing similar work outside the scope of the WIFIA loan, it is the borrower's responsibility to ensure that such work can be differentiated by purpose, place, or time to avoid risking non-compliance. As I mentioned earlier, for Davis-Bacon and AIS, all work that is similar in purpose, place, and time have to be federally compliant, regardless of whether such work is included in the loan. It's a little complicated, so I'll try to give you an example. Say you have a pipe rehab program that you want to use WIFIA funds for 80% of the annual expenditure, and 20% will be done outside of the WIFIA loan. It is your responsibility to ensure that the 20% of work is differentiated by place or time to any work that is being done and used for the WIFIA loan sizing. So generally, our borrowers package most pipe rehab projects in geographic clusters. So I would expect that they should be able to differentiate at least based on place between contracts under the WIFIA loan and those that are not. If this concept is at all confusing, please feel free to type in questions to the dashboard, and we will revisit this. And as always, you can always email us at wifia@epa.gov if you would like to discuss these concepts further. And now I will hand over the audio portion of the webinar to Brian.
Well, thank you, Danusha. My name is Brian Jefferis. I am an underwriter at the WIFIA program. And today I'd like to present a couple of case studies to the audience to give a little bit more background on everything that Danusha mentioned, a little more insight into the concept program of projects and combination of projects and how we've been implementing that. The approach to financing a program or a combination of projects for a utility isn't all that different really than a standalone project like, say, a wastewater treatment plant. We look closely at the borrower to understand how the organization functions, its financing structure, its credit history, the nature of the revenue source dedicated to repaying the debt, and the strength of the economy in the service area. Much of this is laid out in our handbook that's available on the website. There are some differences, however, given the long construction window for these types of projects. The availability period, for instance, on the loan tends to be a little bit longer. We're seeing upwards of 5 years. And defining what it means to be a complete project can be a little bit tricky. These are all things that we work out in the underwriting process, with borrowers to suit their specific needs. So with that said, I'd like to present a couple of case studies, both of which are considered programs of projects. Okay, next slide. Okay. Well, this is actually just a photo of Toho. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, we closed the Toho Water Authority loan last month. They applied to WIFIA to partially fund a program of projects relating to sewer rehab and repair, replace sewer mains, and manholes as well. The projects will help Toho reduce the number of failures and infiltrations into the system, meet its regulatory requirements, and increase overall efficiency of the system. The total project costs were $82 million, and we financed $40 million of that. Next slide. Okay. Toho was established in 2003 by the Florida legislature to consolidate several water and wastewater utilities that were in existence at the time under a single governance structure. Toho is it's a highly rated entity, AAA by Fitch, and it issues debt periodically under a master bond resolution and pledges combined water and wastewater revenues for repayment of that debt. Okay, next slide. Toho utilized a number of flexibilities, and WIFIA borrowers can use these to match their particular situation. For Toho, since it's a program of projects, we were able to define the type of eligible work, the areas where the work can be performed, and the time frame, rather than precisely define a specific project as you would, say, with a wastewater treatment plant. Second, WIFIA was able to align a number of aspects of Toho's master bond resolution. They already borrow, in the market, and they have this framework that's available, for us to look at and see, where we can, align, our terms. And this framework allows Toho to borrow on a subordinate lien, and that means the debt is repaid after senior debt. And so with due diligence, we were able to get comfortable with this position. Our statute allows us this flexibility, but we can only do it if the borrower is financially sound and WIFIA has acceptable legal and financial protections. And lastly, Toho is deferring principal for a period of time after substantial completion and using a sculpted amortization profile. Both are, flexibilities that I think, are important for some borrowers, and sometimes we can do this to help match the repayment profile with if they have existing debt and to keep things relatively smooth. Next slide. So here's our handy Venn diagram again, but not in the compliance sense. We wanted to illustrate the point that the WIFIA project, instead of being precisely defined ahead of time, is instead defined as the projects are executed. So here you see the ideas that Danusha mentioned for programs of projects, purpose, place, and time. Not all sewer lines being repaired by Toho are part of the WIFIA project. And some of those repairs might, that aren't part of the WIFIA project, might also be outside the time frame established by the loan agreement. So the loan agreement sets up these boundaries which allow the borrower flexibility on timing and place and type of repair over the period, this longer construction window that they might have. And it all comes into focus as the projects are completed and through the monitoring process with our portfolio management division. Okay, moving on to DeKalb County. This is also a program of projects. The loan has not closed yet, though. It's very similar to Toho. It's repair and rehab of sewer lines taking place over about 5 years. But unlike Toho, the work is mandated by a consent decree between the county, EPA, and Georgia. They're looking to take care of some priority projects and non-priority projects that are part of this consent decree. And this work will be carried out over a period of about 5 years. It will rehab and repair the collection system, and much of the collection system, or a good portion of the collection system in DeKalb is aging, so it will help bring that up to date. And interestingly, the contract bidding structure it's based on a quantity of deliverable for a fixed budget. Okay, next slide. Okay, DeKalb County, it's situated immediately east of Atlanta. In fact, a portion of the city is within the county. They provide sewer service to residents through their Department of Watershed Management. The county, oversees a number of functions: fire, police, courts, parks and rec, and then obviously sewer and water line management as well. It covers a large geographic area and more than 2,500 miles of sewer and water lines. As I mentioned before, it's an aging wastewater collection and transmission system. DeKalb, because it's a county, it issues debt, both revenue-backed debt and general obligation debt. And so as we move into the next slide, you'll see that WIFIA was able to use a structure that's actually common in the industry, where we are secured by the general obligation credit of the county, and sewer and water revenue is available to repay the WIFIA debt. The other flexibilities, several other flexibilities that DeKalb used, similar to Toho, on point number 1, the work is not precisely defined. We are allowing, sort of flexibility in both purpose, place, and time, and those parameters are defined in the loan agreement. I covered point number 2. On point number 3, we can offer longer maturities than are typically available in the market, and this allows us to, spread the costs out over a generation. And on point number 4, this gets to the construction window that these types of projects have that I mentioned in an earlier slide. Because the WIFIA loan functions more like a bank loan or a line of credit, they have the ability to draw on the loan over the 5-year construction period as costs are incurred instead of all at once. In contrast to a traditional bond offering where, the proceeds are received all at once. This helps to keep interest costs low, and it's better matched for the types of projects with long construction timelines. And on the next slide, this is, again, our handy Venn diagram. It's the same concept as Toho, where you have the purpose, place, and time ideas and the WIFIA project over that 5-year construction period. As the sewer line repair work is complete and all those work packages come in, that information is reported to our portfolio management group, and the project is more precisely defined. And so that wraps up the case studies, and we have additional outreach opportunities where you can seek more information. On the next slide there, you'll see some of those details. We have a webinar coming up on May 20th on applying for WIFIA loan, and we have in-person information sessions that are going to be announced soon. And of course, we're always available to meet with prospective borrowers via phone or in person. And you can send those requests to our mailbox, wifia@epa.gov. And for resources on the next slide, we have a ton of information on our website. and you can see how to apply, the status of the NOFA that's coming up here for another round of letters of interest. And you'll also see, the program handbook, template term sheet, so you can see some of the terms that WIFIA typically has. And we have some learning modules and also the federal requirements. And I think that wraps it up. I don't know, Danusha or Caleb?
Thanks, Brian. Caleb, we still don't have any questions, right? Oh, we have one question. Are the attachments still unlimited for 2020? Yes. The attachments will be unlimited for 2020. The new LOI isn't yet out, but it should be out by the time we put out our NOFA, obviously. And it is shorter than the previous one even, but we still allow you to submit any attachments that you would like to provide with your letter of interest. Okay, well, we can wrap up this webinar pretty early. Hopefully we answered your questions about a program of projects, and we hope to see more programs of projects in the future. Repair and rehab is a significant need out there in the water and wastewater industry, and we're doing our best to try to service those needs for typical projects. We have one more question. A smart meter replacement program for a distribution system can be combined with adding storage tanks. Is that an okay combination? As we mentioned earlier, for a combination of projects, you have to be able to articulate a common purpose, which could be improvement of water quality and service. And so a smart meter replacement program and new storage tanks could probably be combined. One thing that you can always do if you have multiple projects that you're not sure about whether or not they can be combined, you can submit 2 LOIs, one for each project or program. And then after selection, we can work with you to decide if it makes sense to combine it under one loan or not. I think at the LOI period, that's a better course of action. It's a more conservative course since there isn't as much technical discussions during the LOI phase. And if you do have further questions, you can feel free to email us about your project and let us know. One thing that we can do, that we can provide written, is a description of whether a project is eligible or not. And so if you send an email to wifia@epa.gov with your project description, we can let you know if it's eligible via email. Any other questions, Caleb?
Looks like we're all set.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, if anyone does have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us. And thank you for joining us. Bye, everyone.